Today's show has a content warning. Today, we'll be discussing death by suicide and suicide prevention. If you or someone you care about is in need of help, please dial 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in the US. Thank you. Welcome to the On Air podcast. This podcast is a program of the American Association of Veterinary Medical Colleges Diversity Matters Initiative. The podcast explores issues related to diversity and inclusion in the veterinary profession and provides the AAVMC an opportunity to offer ongoing diversity programming to our member institutions as well as all veterinary professionals. My name is Dr. Lisa Greenhill, and I'm the Chief Organizational Health Officer at the AAVMC. So on today's episode, we are discussing suicide prevention. It is September 2025, and in the US, this is Suicide Prevention Month. Of course, this is a big discussion within the veterinary profession, but we acknowledge that the veterinary profession really is just a reflection of larger societal issues around mental health and well-being. Here are a few fast facts from the National Alliance of Mental Health, which include about 5% of adults have serious thoughts of suicide each year. About one person every 11 minutes dies by suicide in the United States. 79% of all people who die by suicide in the US are male. And although more women may attempt suicide, men are 4 times more likely to die by suicide. Unfortunately, in the US, suicide is the second leading cause of death among people between the ages of 10 and 14, and then among people ages 15 to 24. And it's the 11th leading cause of death overall. This show is really devoted to exploring issues around diversity, so I would be remiss if I did not include some discussion of diversity within these statistics. So within minoritized and marginalized populations in the United States, the highest risk category for us in the US are indigenous populations, are American Indian and Native Alaskan populations. However, death by suicide has been steadily increasing for Black and Hispanic populations in recent years. And of course, we know, and there's a lot of documented literature that our queer colleagues, families, and friends are also at a greater risk than the general public. The long and short of it is that for a lot of segments of our population, we see elevated risk for death by suicide. So today, to discuss the appropriate ways to address this issue and prevent further harm, I've invited my wonderful colleagues, Dr. Jen Brandt of the AAVMA, and frequent now guest of the show, Elizabeth Cavallaro from our staff here at AAVMC. Hello, friends and colleagues.
Hello.
Hello. So, as is our custom on the show, I'm going to ask my colleagues to share a little bit about themselves. We're going to go with our current frequent flyer, Elizabeth, who was just on the show a few weeks ago talking about back to school. But just in case you missed that episode or previous episodes featuring EC, tell us about yourself.
Hi, so I'm Elizabeth Cavallaro. I'm the manager for Wellbeing and Professional Competencies at AAVMC. I also have over a decade working in suicide prevention. Specifically, I started out my work in well-being, working in suicide prevention in Florida at a state level federal grant, and then was the coordinator for suicide prevention at Appalachian State University. And I did that work at Appalachian State for 10 years as I continue to get other duties, but this is a topic that I've been working in for a while.
Great, thank you. And Jen, welcome back.
Thank you so much. I'm Dr. Jen Brandt, and I serve as AVMA's Director of Member Wellbeing Initiatives. I've had the privilege of working in veterinary medicine for 30 years, and like Elizabeth, suicide prevention has been a lifelong area of focus for me. I'm a social worker and sociologist and certified anti-oppression informed practitioner with advanced suicidology training as both a certified psychological autopsy investigator and crisis worker through the American Association of Suicidology.
Great, thank you. So let us on to our discussion. So, Jen, what is one big misconception? Just one. I know there's tons, but
There's
just one big
tons.
question. But one biggest misconception about suicide that you hope to clear up during our conversation today.
That is tough. There's so
I
many. I'll pick one that maybe has two sides. Excuse
Okay.
me. One that maybe has two sides. So the first part of that is that there's a myth that if we talk about suicide at all, it makes people think about suicide, and that is not true. But related to that myth is that then it doesn't matter how we talk about suicide as long as we're talking about it. And that is also not true. There are several easy to follow evidence-based standards that allow us to talk about suicide in safe and appropriate ways.
Cool. Elizabeth, what you got?
That would have been mine.
Okay,
But
great.
no, it's okay. I can come up with another one. It's related. That you can put the idea of suicide in somebody's head by talking about it. So when we're talking about suicide, contagion and how we talk about suicide, we're really wanting to be careful because we're concerned about people who are thinking about it already, and we don't want to further put them at risk. But if like I'm just walking about my day and I'm feeling great, and then you talk about suicide to me, I'm not going to suddenly become suicidal. And that is a fear that keeps people often from asking about suicide.
Great. Thank you for that. So, today's conversation, and of course, September is devoted to suicide prevention. And, these things often make it sound like, okay, so here's that singular intervention. Here's that one time we're going to come in and like save the day, Superman, Superwoman, super they, right? So, but I'm guessing it's a little bit more than that singular intervention. So, Elizabeth, can you kind of start laying out for us from your standpoint what suicide prevention actually is? Maybe not the steps so far, but like just kind of get us on the page where we are all kind of talking about the same thing.
I mean, suicide prevention it's not one thing, like you
Sure.
said. And oftentimes I tell people, if you're doing really good suicide prevention work, you're not going to be talking about suicide. So suicide prevention can look like making sure people have access to housing, to healthcare, to mental health care when they need it. They feel that there's a community and there's a sense of belonging. And so there's these societal things that also include suicide prevention, also things like other violence prevention. Interpersonal violence prevention is also linked to reduce suicide. Those kinds of programs, gun safety measures, are suicide prevention. But then there are actual programs like we think of the suicide prevention trainings like QPR, which I did. I was a QPR trainer for a few years, mental health first aid training. People think of those as suicide prevention, and they are, but that's just one component. But that's I think a lot of times when people say, I'm going to do a suicide prevention thing, they just think about training. And that's such a small piece of the picture.
So Jen, can you take us a little bit deeper? Because oftentimes, yeah, we focus. I think that this is zeitgeist conversations are about like in the half hour potentially before somebody gets the text message or somebody drops by and Shazam, right? But what are some of those core components, before you get to that?
Yeah, I loved Elizabeth's wording that if it's true suicide prevention, it isn't actually a whole lot of talk about suicide per se.
Yeah.
So we think about prevention efforts being on a continuum, right? And most of us have heard continuums of upstream, midstream, downstream approaches. And so much of suicide prevention work, that's the harder lift, right? That really requires a village, as we say, are the upstream approaches. So we are looking at policies and structures, and We are looking at things like media guidelines. We are looking at insurance parity. We are looking at a living wage. We are looking at paid leave policies, access to housing, unemployment benefits. So upstream, and importantly, as Elizabeth mentioned, also looking at means restriction, right? All of those things that prevent a crisis from happening in the first place. And we have the same thing when we think about epidemiology, right? Yes, we can treat an individual person who has a flu or something else, but think about all the efforts that we take upstream to avoid anybody getting sick to begin with.
So Elizabeth and I talk a lot, and we also offer a training on systemic thinking, but it sounds like a lot of prevention can and should be happening at the systems kind of policy level to make sure that folks are housed, fed, and I mean, literally Maslow's hierarchy at the very bottom, just kind of making sure, that those basic needs are met to keep people out of various types of life crises. It doesn't mean like, oh my goodness, my partner left me, which is a crisis that can be certainly
Yeah.
triggering, but sometimes it's, wow, there's nothing left in the cupboard
Mm-hmm.
or no cupboard at all.
At all.
Right. And so, you talked a little bit about lethal means safety, Jen. I was wondering if you can, and kind of means counseling. This is an issue that certainly we're seeing a bit more evidence of in the profession. We hear about this particular risk in the health professions, and particularly with veterinary medicine, because euthanasia is in the scope. Not that there aren't other things that folks can use besides euthanasia solutions, but what do we mean when we're talking about strategies around lethal means safety? What does that practically mean?
So a little bit of background I want to
Yeah.
provide that much of what we know about people who may have presented to a hospital setting thinking about suicide or have survived an attempt, that's where our database is. It's the people who survived and
Mhm.
had the privilege or the access to get to a hospital and then be part of a study. And so they are part of the story, but they're not the whole story. What we also know from suicide research and prevention research is that for some people, it really is an impulse. They say, if you had asked me 2 minutes before, it wasn't a thought on my mind, but it became one. And so then the difference is in that second, I'm thinking about it. Can I get to something very quickly and easily with no barriers that has a high degree of lethality? And so often when we're talking about mean safety, we are talking about access to firearms. And in veterinary settings, we are talking to access to pentabarb or other barbiturates. So mean safety isn't necessarily denying access. It might be how do we buffer the access? So for people who have a firearm in the home, particularly people who have children in the home, they might say, oh, my kids don't know where it's hidden. And you ask the kid, they know exactly where it is and they know exactly where the bullets are and they can get there in 30 seconds or less. And so
Yeah.
how do we build a safety wall? Is it a locked mechanism? Are the bullets stored somewhere else? So again, it's not denying access. It's just, could we make safer access? When it comes to pentabarb, some solutions have been proposed about maybe two people needing to access a drug, and we know that isn't actually a viable option. If you're an ambulatory practice, you don't have that second person, but they
Yeah.
can be in a locked box at all times. And people at higher risk, we could discuss temporary measures that might also impact their easy access. Even the step of having to go get a key, unlock the box, even if you're an ambulatory practitioner and the key is stored in the glove box and the safe
Yeah.
with the medication is somewhere else, there's evidence to support that even that minute buffer may be enough to override that impulse and somebody can, what am I doing? And then
Yeah.
access help. So we're
Yeah.
talking about buying time.
Got it. Got it. So, that I want to circle back to that systems piece. And the reality is we can't adjust all those systems. Some of those systems are above us, right? And we can't necessarily pull those levers. And so a lot of people may end up really kind of in, at the edge of crisis, right? And so we also talk a lot about resiliency in the profession, and I'm very transparent about the fact that I think that the ways in which we talk about resiliency can be a bit toxic in the profession. Like, everybody should be resilient. And I'm like, what does that mean? I'm supposed to be happy all the time? No. Like, we don't necessarily acknowledge that sometimes life is just tough, right?
Yeah.
And so that folks are a lot more resilient than already, right? And so how resilient do we expect them to be? But, Elizabeth, I'm really kind of curious about your thoughts on what does it mean to build kind of resilient communities where folks don't hit the right crisis point as often, recognizing that we also can't pull all the levers and create the type of preventive system that we really need.
I think that when we're thinking about resilient communities, we want to try to take the burden off the individual to be
Mm.
resilient and attempt to create communities where there is some responsibility on the organizations to create environments where people are able to thrive and able to show up and admit when they're struggling and can get support. So really, we're talking about psychologically safe working environments where if somebody is really having a hard time, that they're not going to get punished for needing help, or they're not going to be looked down on for showing up in a way that's different than maybe how they've shown up before. If somebody's been a really high performer and then something happens and they need rest. Maybe they do go through like a divorce or a death or something big happens, to expect them to continue to show up and be that high performer that they were a month ago isn't fair to them, and it's going to create bad outcomes for your patients too. So when I think of resilient communities, I think of communities that are flexible enough to allow people to go through hard things, to get the rest they need, and to then come back when they're ready and continue to get support along that journey.
I love that. And I really appreciate that kind of characterization of what a psychologically safe community looks like, right? Because, I think that a lot of people have been in situations where they didn't necessarily feel like they could take the whole day off to go for medical appointments, even though like they're critical medical appointments, right? Or they couldn't necessarily take a day off to just rest. I'm that person. like, like, right? And I get dinged for it a lot by my friends, where even just this week I've been sick, and what am I doing? Working from home the entire week. And so instead of watching Judge Judy. so I mean, I appreciate the fact that there's this flexibility, there is this ability to be transparent and authentic and saying, hey, I'm not okay. And I need some support. I really, really appreciate that. So can you tell us a little bit, Elizabeth, about the difference between suicide ideation, intent, and then a plan? Like, how does this kind of change the immediate course of action if you are with someone, know someone, what is that one-on-one intervention?
Well, first of all, I recommend that people who are not trained mental health professionals don't really need to make a huge distinction. If they know that somebody's thinking about suicide, their responsibility is to get somebody to a support system that can
Right.
further define this and figure out somebody's risk, because putting that on a person who is not a mental health professional is a lot. And so the one thing that I always want people to come out of my trainings with is, somebody is suicidal, your responsibility is to get them to a professional who can support them, or to get them to talk to a crisis counselor who can do a more further risk assessment. But there is different levels of suicide risk. So we have somebody who might be thinking about suicide in a more passive fashion. They aren't actively trying to die or wanting to die, but maybe they just feel like things would be better if they were dead. That would be considered a pretty low risk person. And there are some people who live with those kinds of thoughts chronically. And then we have someone who is thinking about suicide in the way that they want to die. They would like to die, but they aren't making any plans to make that happen. And then we have people who are making plans. And as you go up this ladder, you get higher risk. But maybe they have a plan, but they don't actually have access to that plan, or they're not making moves to get access to that plan. They just know how they would do it if they wanted to do it. And then you have the person that has the plan and has access to the plan, which is the highest risk. And I would say that person who is at highest risk, if you know somebody has a plan, they're pretty high risk. If they have a plan and they have access to that plan, you don't leave that person alone. You have to stay with them. That's a handoff, a physical handoff to that professional to make sure that they get that support, because that is a super high risk individual.
Gotcha. Jen, anything to add?
I think that she did a great job. You did a great job, Elizabeth. I would say the really important point is you may not need to get bogged down in all those details. If this isn't what you do for a living, do something. I will say if you attend any kind of prevention training, you will likely be taught 3 questions that basically get to that. Are you thinking about it at all? And I would say clinically, I've asked that question in my role probably more than the average person.
Sure.
And I'll often get no, or well, yeah, but everybody does, right? So it's not a high marker of high lethality. Then do you have a plan, as Elizabeth said? And then the third one is, do you have access to that plan? So in variations, those 3 questions help you kind of
parse out.
But I even say, even just look for a basic change. It may not even be a specific sign, but if you notice an affect change or just they're not themselves, something's going on. And so cueing into that would be important.
Yeah, thank you both. And I really appreciate, there is an opportunity for intervention. Like, here are some questions that can be asked if you go to those trainings, or, but the handoff is really important. And I think I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm not going to, y'all can come out with me after I've said what I said, or not. You can stay on the tree trunk. But I have historically found that in working with a number of health professions on the human side, but also in veterinary medicine, that sometimes some professionals don't necessarily want to stay in their lane. Right. And so, and sometimes, veterinarians are like, we can do all the things. And I'm like, you can do so many things. And it's okay to hand off when something is beyond your lane. You need to hand off. Not it's just okay. You need to hand off. That is the intervention. Yeah, Elizabeth, I saw you were chomping at the bit. Let's go.
That is why I always make it clear in my trainings, because I think people go to these trainings and they teach conversation skills and active listening skills. And so sometimes people leave them feeling like, well, I know how to have a conversation. And when the conversation goes well, they see that the person is de-escalated. And so they think, oh, I've done my job. Like, this person who was in crisis is now feeling a lot better. And they might be feeling better in that one moment, but the moment you leave is when that risk will escalate again. And so no matter what, your job is to get them, it's not to make them feel better. That's a great thing that you did, but your job in a suicide conversation is to get that person to a professional, especially in the academic setting where that is probably written somewhere into your manual as a faculty member, that if you have a student that you know or is at risk, I don't know about your colleagues, but if you're dealing with a student specifically and you find out that they're suicidal and you don't connect them to a professional, and usually also let your dean of students office know that you have a student who's at risk of ending their life, that is a liability for the college themselves. So you need to make those connections. And I would say if you're a faculty member or staff member at a college, you also need to make sure that you report that to whoever at your college collects that information to reach out to that student themselves.
Yeah, we've seen that we've seen this need for mandatory reporting or documenting and all of those. We've seen it how many times with school shootings, right? And I mean, I'm a native Virginian. I just think back to the big Virginia Tech shooting, what, almost 20 years ago, and how various professors tried to kind of say, hey, 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 because the student that committed the crime also died by their own hand as well. And so there were signs there. And to Jen's point, like there was a difference in affect, and different professors after the event, unfortunately, they were like, hey, we tried to tell somebody, and those are real things. So Jen, can you tell us a little bit about what postvention is, right? So and what does that care look like for an attempted survivor?
Often we talk about postvention as the aftermath of a
Yeah.
suicide or a suicide attempt, as you referenced. And so, for example, if somebody's been admitted to the hospital, we know upon discharge that's a higher period of risk. We know that. And it's interesting that in some of the studies that have been done, what they call carrying contact within 24 to 48 hours, sending out a card or an email or a text or a phone call, like something that simple, that easy to implement can make a drastic difference in survival rates post-discharge. I think already mentioned has been the warm handoff, as part of discharge planning. Ideally, what's happening is not, hey, good luck with that, but here are the numbers to call. We've made some arrangements for you. As a friend, it might look like, I can't sit in the session with you, but I'm happy to drive you there and
Mm,
drive you back home or meet you at your home when you come home so that you have somebody to debrief with. And then on a systemic level, let's say if it's a,
yeah.
a colleague, then looking at, what realistic adjustments can we make in the workplace, knowing, as Elizabeth said earlier, it wasn't necessarily just a crisis now, but there may be long term. Do I need to have my schedule adjusted so that I can make it to medical appointments? What are the easy access options that are affordable? Do we provide an EAP program?
Mm,
Looking at the scheduling and the workload for a period of time. All of those can be part of helpful postvention.
good deal. And Elizabeth, Jen alluded to it and talked a little bit about what this looks like, but are there things within an academic environment that could be helpful? Kind of what are some of those systems things that again aren't just for postvention, right? But kind of at the systems level, one of the things that we're really trying to get folks to think about at AAVMC is how do you build a system such that you don't have to keep tinkering and wrenching things into place when something happens, when something, frankly, that is periodically predictable will happen.
So when I one thing when I think about postvention, usually we're talking about deaths by suicide. But
Mhm.
regardless, when you're looking at something, an event that you think could happen, I think it's always better to convene whoever needs to be in that room before the event happens and create your plan on how you're going to respond to that in advance. Because what happens when somebody, maybe you find out someone in your community has attempted suicide and you don't have that plan, or somebody has died by suicide and you don't have that plan, you're reacting emotionally because people have their emotions. And
Yeah.
so you're not reacting in a way that benefits the community or the system as a whole. So convening before and figuring out what your plan is going to be and writing that down too. Sometimes you have people who in a community or in an organization, they know how things are done because they have that institutional knowledge, but no one's ever actually written it down. So as soon as they leave the organization, that is lost. Or if they're sick on the day this happens, or they're on vacation, nobody knows what to do, and now it's a scramble. So have that plan, and it does make things a lot smoother. It also does make things feel very not very warm and fuzzy. So
Mm,
you need to make sure
mm,
that when the event happens, the people in the room know that we do it this way because it works for the system. This is not a place where we're going to process feelings, really.
mm.
And so, because it can be really challenging emotionally for people who may be invited into that space who had a close connection with the person. if they're not prepared for a meeting that's very much process oriented and not emotional, because you're just going through the steps. You're like, this needs to happen, this needs to happen, this needs to happen. Who's going to do it? Who's going to do that? And okay, we're going to follow up at this time. And it's very much like a crisis management kind of team, not an emotional team. So, but you
Great
should in
distinction.
advance know who's going to be invited to the table too, and what their contacts are as well. So I think the system can just have the plan in place and then be ready to execute it when they need to.
Plug and play. Yeah. And so, Jen, to put a little bit more meat on the bones here, so to speak, having worked at an institution, what might a system's response optimally look like? Not what sometimes they do look like. No shade to folks that are really struggling during tough times to do the right thing, because we know that it's hard. But to Elizabeth's points, when you don't have a plan, emotion, reptile brain is trying to work with the frontal lobe and things get messy, right? So what are some elements of at least like that communication plan? What should that look like?
I love this part of the conversation because for those in postvention, we talk about postvention is prevention.
Yeah.
So thinking about it that way, and I want to offer or suggest a resource that people access. It's free. Anybody can get it. AVMA collaborated very closely with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention to develop postvention guides. So you're not having to start from scratch. There's one for academic settings, which has a whole different resources, just different scenarios going on, and then one for workplaces. And so it spells out, including templates, like here's an email you could send, or here's phrasing you could use in the meeting. So rather than start from scratch, I encourage people to access those. And as part of that, have those meetings and review that document before you ever need it. Like the goal is, I hope you never need these resources, but you will be so much better served if you've looked at them in advance and put anything that can be put into place or ready to go ahead of time. So as part of that, some elements would be a rapid response team. You need a qualified mental health professional. Leadership would be involved, HR would be involved, and the goal is to meet as quickly as possible, debrief, what do we know, what do we not know, what are we allowed to, what does the family allow us to say? Don't make any presumptions about that. I've worked with families who are like, tell everybody everything, and others are, you are not permitted to share. And that can be tricky. So know that, and then have a plan for responsible communication. So it's fact-based, what you can share. It's compassionate. It might even be acknowledging that there's some things we can't share. We'll focus on the things that we can. It is getting support systems in place long term, right? Not just short term, but your ability to focus in class, if this was your best friend, is not going to be there for a while. In our culture, we think you can grieve in 3 days and be ready to go. You're not. And many people may have had firsthand witness accounts. So all of that is being attended to. There are some other factors right now. My brain is struggling to come up with them, but those would be some of the things that we would focus on. And again, safe communication standards. Another big thing to look at is how we memorialize. Often there can be many deaths in a college or a workplace that are not memorialized in any way other than a recognition. But when it's a suicide death, everybody wants to come in and do something unique. And that actually is not indicated. It actually can increase the risk of contagion. And so what the experts will say is do what you do for every other death, right? So if it's a bench in the park for a person who died by a cardiac event, then that's fine. But if it's only when it's a suicide, you need to really seriously consider that. And that can be a tough conversation to have when there are so many emotions cropping up. Or guidance that if you do like an online memorial, then it is a time limited one. It doesn't stay up. It may be a 30-day notice and then we pull that down. So there are so many variables to think about that we don't, that well-intentioned can actually cause more harm than good. And again, trying to manage that in the moment, if it's the first time you're ever looking at that concept is really difficult to do. Same thing with pet owners. If we know there's a serious illness, we don't not ever talk about that. And let's think about the next step. We don't wait till the moment the crisis has happened and ask the client to make every decision that needs to be made then. We've had that conversation much, much sooner. So all of that is part of postvention, which is also an important role in prevention.
And I want to add to if you're at a college, you want to again check with your university to see what their protocols and policies are. You don't want to go rogue from what your university policy and
Agreed.
protocols are. They might have already emails for you, for example, that they want you to use, template emails. They might have policy around memorialization. I know when I worked at Appalachian State, we did, and colleges were not allowed to do their own memorials separately from what the university did. So make sure you're following those university policies and protocols. It kind of makes your job easier if they're already there. And if they're not there, that might be a cool place for the veterinary college to start advocating to create those university-wide procedures.
Oh, I mean, it's interesting because, we live in a time where crisis communication is becoming regular communication. Like it feels like it's just like every day is a crisis, right? And so oftentimes we might have a plan, a general plan, but this one, it sounds like there's definitely some nuance and there's other pieces to take into consideration. I would say that despite the fact that, we're talking primarily about academic settings at AAVMC, but I'm guessing you can't go wrong having one of these kind of policies hanging around whatever type of work environment you are at, because again, you just don't know what folks are going through, and you need to be ready to have something to say. And I'm sure that Beyonce's Internet probably has various drafts for you to pull one down, including, AI now. But it definitely sounds like there are some things that, at a systems level, we need to think about. Now, for the individual for whom there's a friend, the friend of the friend, right? And oftentimes, when we lose someone, we also see, social media flare and icons and notificate all the things, right? And everyone is kind of pouring out and all of that. Do you have guidance, Elizabeth, maybe for the rank and file who are grieving and grieving very publicly? And oftentimes I see it as a call for community, but it goes left pretty quickly. So any guidance for, folks that are, maybe a concentric circle or two removed, but still feel deeply impacted?
Yeah, I had a lot of experience usually successfully redirecting grieving friends to more productive things that they could do, because a lot of times they want to spend their time doing things like memorials in ways that are potentially unsafe. And it comes from a place of, like you said, wanting community and also wanting to feel like they can do something, because feel oftentimes they unfortunately feel like they should have done something to prevent this from happening. And so this is their attempt at trying to rectify those feelings. And they often are doing it very freshly after this has happened. So there's not been a lot of time to properly grieve. So I would often redirect them towards things like fundraising events, or if there was a community out of the darkness walk, starting a team, things like that, or volunteering for like a crisis training, a crisis hotline. Maybe not right now. I would usually say like maybe we just wait a little bit, but in the future, once you've gotten through this, that's an opportunity. And trying to keep them from doing more unsafe things like a memorialization, or trying to tell their story when it's so fresh and they haven't had time to process what that story means, and if they actually do want to tell it. And so having those opportunities ready, especially a mental health counselor at a college, knowing what opportunities exist potentially at the university to take the students who are wanting to do something, who have this energy to do something, and being ready to redirect them towards that. So I don't say no, this energy needs to be squashed. I say, I think it's so great that you want to honor your friend in this way. Here's a way to do it that's safe and will actually make a difference.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So we've covered a lot of ground in our time together. And so, we talked a little bit about the policy stuff. We've talked about this need for community and how the community can be preventive, right? So that the individual doesn't have to do all the work. The community is resilient versus just the individual. And, postvention. I do want to ask a bit about kind of safety plans as we get ready to wrap up. And so, Jen, what is a safety plan? I mean, other than the obvious. What is a safety plan?
Yeah, again, there are different views of safety
Sure.
plans, but essentially it's building a connection and community, even if it's with a few peers, to help protect people who may be at particularly vulnerable times. It is not a plan you throw at somebody and dictate. It is a co-created effort. And it can start with just like acknowledging, I see something different. How are you doing? And maybe asking some screening questions. It will say, I'm here to work with you to find ways to keep you the safest. What does that look like for you? Again, we're not imposing it on anyone. We don't want to destroy, access to autonomy. We want people to have a say, but basically acknowledging I am here as part of this and what role can I play, or offering suggestions. So it's really this way of circling or providing that additional safety net during periods that are difficult for people. That said, again, we don't have to be reactive. We can step back and have these conversations sooner to have a general idea of what are some things we could already have in place. So we don't need to do any special requests to get them. We'll just have them be a standard that's available, but then customize that plan to the individual.
Like it. I like it. And yeah, I would definitely say, don't wait until the crisis to try to come up with like nobody is in the mood to plan once the crisis is on your doorstep. Don't do that. And so here's my, nickel guidance advice. I have a number of friends who, have struggled over the years. No, we go to brunch and we talk about how we're going to take care of each other in crisis. We don't wait. Like we have a good environment, we're having fun, but we're also having a serious conversation about like, hey, suppose dark times come and, I see some things that make me a little worried about you. Like, let's talk about what it would look like. Let's talk about what an intervention looks like. And I'm going to say, it sounds like a hard conversation. Maybe it's just an age thing that it seems to be getting easier as I get older to have that kind of conversation. Once you, start getting towards, start looking at breaking hip ages. Right. But, really kind of just saying, hey, we love each other. We're friends. Here's what I plan on doing. Are you good with that? Like,
Yes.
I'm throwing you over my shoulder. Not really, but you're going to get in the car. And we're gonna go to the hospital. Like we're gonna go to the patient first. I kind of get you checked out. And so have those conversations, have them over brunch, have them over at happy hour, but it's okay because friends should be able to have those kind of conversations. Right. Yeah. Yeah. So last question for each of you. Where do you believe an individual can have the most immediate tangible impact on prevention? Like, what is that one thing that you want everybody to go out and do? And I know they have a smorgasbord of things, so this is just your favorite thing. Like one of my favorite thing is talking about prevention over brunch when there's not a crisis, right? But there is French toast. So Elizabeth, what is that one thing that you would say, hey, look into this, do this?
Get comfortable asking the suicide question. That's the one thing. And say it straight. Don't skirt around it. just, are you thinking about suicide? Are you thinking about killing yourself? Look in the mirror, tell it to yourself, so that when you're in that situation, you'll still feel scared and you'll still feel nervous, but you can get it out of your mouth.
Good deal. Jen.
I think you are making it very difficult. One thing, because you all have covered the communication piece, I'm still gonna sneak in two.
Sure.
One would be get gatekeeper training. AVMA offers it for free, like
Okay.
for free. Anyone can take our suicide prevention training so that these conversations don't necessarily become comfortable, but you can do them and you can commit to them. And I would also say open discussions about lethal means safety. There are free training programs on it. I may get the name right, but the Zero Suicide Institute offers a free training that you can do online in your own time that addresses both medication and firearms. And so get well versed in these things so it is less scary to have these conversations.
Great. Thank you. And then the last thing I'll certainly add is keep those hotline, lifeline numbers in the back pocket. Go ahead and program them into your phone. Just program it into your phone. Like just put it in there. But also have them just at the ready. I know most of us don't actually remember phone numbers anymore. I only remember my parents' phone number, the AAVMC office number, only because I've been around for almost 30 years. Like it's like these are, numbers that are locked in, but the 988 is a easy number to remember. So try to commit it to memory, and if you can't, put it in your phone. So with that, thank you so much. And yes, we will put some resources into the show notes. So thank you again to Elizabeth and Jen. Always a pleasure to have you both on the show. Great topic and wonderful discussion. Again, as we noted in the top of the show, if you or someone that you care about is in need of help, please dial 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline in the US. Actually, I think it's in North America. I was looking up at Canada, and I think they have the same number. So we will certainly try to also get some source information for places where we have member institutions around the world. So again, thank you so much to my guest. And this has been another episode of AAVMC's On Air podcast. Be sure to like and subscribe to us on your favorite podcast app. And until next time, see you later.